Hello, everybody. Posted a link to our agenda in the Zoom chat. We'll get started in a few minutes. If you would like to mark your attendance and add any opens to the agenda. So far, we have 2 exciting topics, but we're always open to have a couple more afterwards.
Hello, thank you.
You're welcome. We'll officially get started a couple minutes after the hour. Hello, friends. We will get started in about a minute. If you could sign into our agenda and add any opens you'd like to discuss today. We're going to start off with Jonathan's draft disclosure policy. So if folks want to, those that haven't read it, wanted to open that up in our minute we have while we're gathering, go ahead and do that. That'll be our first topic.
I might have to add myself. My role is not there.
Oh, no. I guess that means you haven't shown up in a while, Arno.
But I have, and
oh, I don't know. I'll get you added back into the template.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It'd
Because
be
we're
nice.
pals.
Thank you.
I think, though, I've learned from the best practices working group, I am going to stop commingling meeting agendas. It takes me about a solid 45 seconds to load the best practices agenda now. There's been so many changes to it. I want to not get us to that point. All right, friends. Clock on the wall says it's 3 after the top of the hour. Welcome to the March 22nd edition of the Vulnerability Disclosures Working Group. Happy spring to those of you that are in spring season. As we start off, do we have anyone that is interested in helping us take notes today, please?
I can take notes.
Oh, thank you, Nicole. Appreciate that. All right. Now that very important order of business is taken care of, do we have any new friends that wanted to say hello and introduce themselves to the working group?
I'm not new, but I switched jobs, so it took me a year to get back. So hi again, I'm back, and now I'm with Active State.
Welcome back.
Don't call it a comeback. You've been here for years. Awesome. Welcome back. Anyone else wanted to introduce themselves? Any other first timers or newly back?
Oh, probably I am in the second category, newly back. And yeah, I am in another working group usually with Michael. And but in this period, I am posting a lot in your channel about policy. And probably I try to add in the opens in the meeting notes. And hi.
Welcome. Glad to have you. Any other new friends before we get started?
I guess I'm also new in a way. I've been attending the best practices working group. So this is the first time I'm attending this working group here. So it's nice to be here.
Awesome. Well, welcome. We're glad to have you. Anybody else? All right. Let us start with our first order of business. I will yield the floor to Jonathan. He has a vulnerability disclosure policy that he's had open for comments for a little while. So let's take a look at that and see if we can get this resolved and moved to the next step. Take it
At
away.
least a month, I think.
Jonathan.
Yeah, so hopefully my goal with this meeting is to put this document into a final state where we can submit it to LF Legal and the TAC. So I want to go through any open question, so at a high level, my goal for this call is to go through the remaining open comments, concerns, and resolve them, and so we can get this into a final shippable state and submit it to other higher bodies to review. So let's see, the first comment that's still outstanding is, when does the OpenSSF plan to implement this? And I responded that this needs to get past legal and the TAC, so that is taken care of. The next comment, someone responded here stating, or Chris, you wanted to see the term timeline and deadline replaced. I understand there's supposedly some negative feedback around the term dead in the term deadline. I don't
Due
necessarily
date is the university recommended substitution. There's one or two universities that have substitution lists for no longer recommended terms.
So what's the term for timeline instead?
I don't think there's an issue with timeline. Let me go quick look up that list, but I know the date one was due date, but let me look up timeline.
What about time limit instead of timeline? Because it puts it's a limit, not a time. It's not a timeline. It's there's a cutoff. Go ahead, Grobe.
What happens if you are in the midst of validating the vulnerability and the fix, and that extends beyond your 90-day deadline?
The policy states that if you if the maintainer lets us know that the patch is scheduled to be released on a day that falls within 14 days following the deadline, then we will delay public disclosure until the patch is available. So they have a 14-day buffer beyond if they say we just need 2 more weeks.
I've been doing this for a decade, and it's nice to have an ideal target state, but reality kind of gets in the way sometimes. So I would suggest the alteration to timeline. It's a little friendlier and it gives the impression of a little bit more flexibility, but ultimately it's up to you. Legal's gonna redline this beyond whatever we agree upon. And they will tell you what to do as opposed to me asking you to do something.
And I'm not finding anything related to the time one in the university substitution list. It's just due date or deadline. Timeline is apparently fine.
Randall.
I kind of wanted to plus one what Probe said, because I know that lately a lot of people have been saying that 90 days sometimes is not enough time. And I know at some point you got to draw the line. I get it. But I know that right now, certain actors that are just using that timeline to their favor to do things that are naughty. Let's just put it that way.
So it's intended to be a slightly flexible hard deadline, right? Like there is some flexibility built into this policy, but at the end of the day, you need a deadline. And one of the things that Google, if you look at Google's FAQ from their Project Zero, they have a long history of doing vulnerability disclosure, and they said if you don't have a deadline and you don't enforce that deadline, then these vendors continue to move forward with not fixing these things in a timely manner. Chrome.
Google is a commercial enterprise, and your target is going to be open source developers who are not necessarily commercial employees and are not necessarily beholden to SLAs and timelines. So again, I would just encourage a little more softening of the language. But again, whatever we decide, other people will ultimately weigh in with more authority.
Randall. Nope, hand down. Okay. I'm gonna replace this with time limit. Is that acceptable? For now, yes, no, yeah, count thumbs up, great, perfect, okay. If a deadline, so this comment is, if a deadline is due to expire on a weekend or US holiday, the deadline will be, okay, so we have to do time limit on all of these.
Google Docs has a find and replace somewhere.
Yeah.
And I think Jordan's comment is to remove the US specific, because you have things like the Golden Week in China, and other cultures and nations have important public holidays we want to make sure we're aware of, because developers live everywhere.
Yeah, so again, the rationale here is currently so the developers are, but the people that are currently going to be disclosing the vulnerabilities are US based. The thing that your comment about holidays would still fall within this sub policy, right? So if a maintainer comes forward and says, hey, we've got a holiday on this deadline, can you push it out? We will be releasing on X day. That still falls within the 14-day push. So they can make that request. And still, it just makes it so that we're not disclosing vulnerabilities within, the time, we're not going to disclose vulnerabilities when we're on vacation or on holiday, so that, there's nobody available to respond.
Again, we are a global organization. We have contributors from around the world. Some people get offended with a US centric focus. So again, I would just softening it, saying major public holidays, and that gives you a little more flexibility.
The struggle that I have with this is that I don't have there's the point here that Art makes that says there was a point here that he said, but there is if you look at public holidays around the world, you're going to end up with a very dense map of when you can't disclose vulnerabilities, right? And so if you're making it exclusive of all public holidays.
I didn't say all, I said major. And again, removing the US centric focus would be more palatable to our international friends.
Okay, so just major public holidays?
Yeah, that gives you lots of flexibility.
Okay.
And again, if your team only works on a US schedule, that's okay.
Okay.
Right. Even this call, we have many folks from different nations attending this particular event.
Okay.
Randall.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Jonathan, I don't want you to think that we're trying to take away from what you're doing. I think that it's very good, and I think that as time increases, we can move in that direction. But yeah, I think that as a packager, I know some of these things all too well.
Yeah, and again, I provide feedback based off of my experiences and perspective. This isn't a criticism. It's much easier to have productive work if somebody gave you something to start from, as opposed to us working off a blank page.
Yeah.
So again, it's not critiquing the idea. It's just providing some feedback on how you might want to massage
Right.
it.
And so, a lot of this is, so the way that this document started out with, it's Google's policy copied and then heavily modified to focus on the OSSF, right? So that some of this wording is originally from their policy. I see the reason and rationale that you're coming forward with this on this one. Okay.
Real quick, Jonathan, are you familiar with the homebrew thing that happened to me? Okay, well, we can talk about it later offsite, but basically you don't want to go into anyone thinking that you're quote unquote strong arming anyone. And that's why I'm saying be as flexible as possible and then move into like rules down the line. Because some people think that like we try to strong arm people by doing like automated pull requests and stuff. And I'm sure you've run into it. So yeah, I just think we should be weary of that because getting pigeonholed into that conversation usually distracts from like the objective.
Right. The reason that you want a policy like this is because if you don't set your expectations up front, if they don't, it's really hard to retcon communicating there's a deadline, but you want to communicate this stuff up front in the original disclosure.
Totally agree.
Right.
I don't think anyone's disputing those goals. We're just again providing some coaching
Right.
on how it might be more palatable to different audiences.
Right. So here Kurt is asking that we define extreme circumstances to set expectations. Thoughts on this? This is related to this comment down here. As always, we reserve the rights to bring forward or backward based upon extreme circumstances. So,
and you could put something along the lines of there is reported widespread public exploit would be an example.
well, that's here.
Yeah. Again, Kurt's also done this a very long time, actually longer than me. So again, his perspective is, I think, valuable here for us.
Do we want to define what extreme circumstances are, or do we want to keep it nebulous so that we can so that we, as implementers of this policy, can handle it on a case-by-case basis?
If we were to put an example instead of defining it,
Yeah.
would that at least set some form of like line in people's head, but without locking us in?
Yes. Does anybody have any examples they want to provide?
Acts of God.
I think an insurance company used that once when I hit a deer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then just a simple parenthetical, e.g., give an example or two and then move on.
Do you have any examples you want to throw in here?
I think acts of God actually is a fairly acceptable thing. What if there is an earthquake and it destroys a lot of infrastructure and the developer can't respond, or again, documented widespread public exploitation, those types of things. It doesn't need to be a dictionary, a whole encyclopedia. It just needs to be a sentence.
All right, if anybody wants to add additional suggestions there, go for it. This doc, I will post this. There's a link to this document in the note. Yes, in the notes. Great. Okay. So this is, we can add more there. There is, if the maintainer lets us know that a patch is scheduled for release. So there was a discussion about changing the term from patch to remediation. I think that we want to use the term patch. Is there anybody here who wants to argue that we want to use the term remediation instead? Go for it, Crow.
What if it's easier to roll out a config file change and then have an actual software fix come at a later date to meet the deadline? That's a remediation, mitigation.
Y-
Yes, we ultimately want the thing fixed, but sometimes a workaround is better to reduce the immediate risk while there could be complexities on delivering that final software fix.
I mean, ultimately, if the maintainer wants to accelerate the disclosure deadline, they can, right? If they want to do it faster than the 90 days, right? We're setting the outer bounds of what is causing us to disclose, and it's the patch, right? If they want to put out a remediation guide beforehand, then that's not going to be.
Not everything gets fixed with a patch, though.
Sure, right.
Maybe turning a service off. Hot fix, yeah. There's a lot of different. So again, remediation is more of a generic term.
So, okay, in the context of the sentence, before the 90-day time limit is expired, the maintainer lets us know that a patch is scheduled for release on a specific day that will fall within the following 14-day deadline. We will delay the public disclosure until the availability of the patch. Do we want to say, so you're saying that patch or remediation?
I would just use remediation personally,
Okay,
but I'm not the author of this document, and ultimately, you're the decider on how you want to move this forward.
Anybody else have any commentary on this particular topic?
When I have to deal with the non-developer users, I have favored using remediation on our vulnerability information sheets because they comprehend that faster than patch. But that's, I don't know how many people outside of developers are going to be reading this necessarily.
I would agree on the language for remediation. It seems more universally accepted as just a way around, whereas patch almost you think of a band-aid or a duct tape. And that's not always the way a remediation happens, as was stated, by like turning off a service if needed.
Yeah, we usually use remediation versus mitigation, where remediation means that you're not, the vulnerability is no longer applicable under any situation, and mitigation is kind of like what Corb was mentioning, workarounds, configuration changes, that vulnerability is still there, but you compensating controls that make it inapplicable.
Oh. All right, I can do that.
Can we go
That
back
sounds
down and take a look
reasonable.
at that wording again, though?
What?
Can we go back down and take a look at the wording of that sentence again, though, with the remediation in it?
Yes. Before the 90-day time limit has expired, the maintainer lets us know that remediation is scheduled for release on a specific day that will fall within 14 days following the timeline.
No, so that wording lets us know that remediation steps have begun. Remediation is not even on a specific day. Remediation steps have begun that will fall within 14 days following the time limit. So when we think about remediation is it could be a set of steps. It's not a one thing or another. It's a set of steps in remediation. That could include a hot fix towards a potential patch that gets released, right? But those are remediation steps, and remediation steps can begin, can fall within that 14 days following the time limit, right? So what you're saying here now is you're going to begin remediation steps within 14 days, and that gives you, I mean, that even gives you a bit of schedule creep in there as well, right? Within 14 days, that could be day of as you identify a hot fix, or that could be day 7 once there's been enough triage to identify a hot fix towards a potential patch and release.
So what we're saying here is that we want to support a maintainer who, instead of publishing a release, is going to publish a remediation, which may be a patch, which may be instructions, and is not going to allow for a dependency update to fix this. They can publish a remediation, and then at that point, at the point they disclose the remediation, the full details of the vulnerability will go public.
Well, the thing about remediation steps is that that's up to the maintainer. If it were me, I'm not going to publish my remediation steps. What I'll end up publishing is what we decide to do as a hot fix towards remediation, right? Like your remediation steps should be your own. That's like telling somebody how you're making the donuts. You don't want to tell somebody how you make donuts. You know what I mean? You make the donuts and the donuts taste good. But if you use stevia as a substitute for honey or something like that, well, nobody needs to know that right away. You had to do a hot fix, which was stevia, until you got some more honey. Nobody needs to understand that you're using honey in your, are you guys following what I'm saying? I'm talking about.
I am not. I understand what you're saying, but I don't get how it relates to this terminology, because to me, they're informing us that they're doing remediation. We're not obligating them to provide full detail in the way that I'm reading it. Whereas what I'm hearing you say, and maybe I'm hearing it wrong, is that your expectation is that they're providing us full details of how they're remediating it.
No, I'm not saying provide full detail. That's not what I'm saying at all. To say that they're doing remediation, yes. If it's within for them to acknowledge, hey, we have begun remediation steps. Yes, that could include a hot fix in the interim while you begin remediation steps towards remediating, towards a remedy. You know what I mean? Like a hot fix is just a hot fix is a band-aid. That's not a remedy, right? So and if you're saying that they need to begin within 14 days, and what you're notifying them is that within 14 days, we will notify you that remediation has begun. It's not a remediation. I don't know what a remediation is. The remediations are steps.
Sorry, so that if maintainer lets us know that a remediation publication, because they're publishing the remediation, either the remediation or the patch. As you're saying, what Krob is saying is, or what somebody said, is that remediation is a superset of patching.
Well, no, patching is a step in remediation.
Yeah. Patching is a subset of remediation.
So originally,
each incident is going to be slightly different in kind of the makeup of the software, the maintainer's capabilities, the researcher's capabilities, the community. That there's a lot of circumstances that go into this. So I think what you're looking for is the researcher wants to know that there's meaningful work and this will be fixed at some point. And generically, I have in my past have used remediation, that there's a fix, there's a solution coming sometime, and that depending on what the particular circumstances are, that could be a hot fix, it could be configuration change. Ultimately, we would love to have that software fix, but sometimes it's not possible, or not possible within the timeframes requested from the researcher. So we were trying to stress flexibility, and we want to be strong that we have this process and we're working towards these timelines. But sometimes if we get that hot fix, that might be, or a configuration change, turn the thing off, that might be just as good as that ultimate fix, because the downstream community might not be able to take that patch. Potentially there's regressions that there's some ABI compatibility problems that they can't take that new fix, and the hot fix or disabling the service is the preferred solution for them. So I'm just trying to provide you flexibility. If you say we have to have a patch, not everything gets fixed with the patch.
I mean, ultimately, if they're going to publish a remediation, then at the point they publish the remediation, which may not be the patch, which may happen before a patch is released, that is the deadline that we're working under.
That's all part of the negotiation. Again, you need to understand is how much of that risk is treated or mitigated. What's the residual risk left over? And that's kind of part of the negotiation process. Yes, we would love to have the thing completely fixed, but sometimes, like with old code bases, or if there's a very complex downstream ecosystem, or the fact that the developer is part of a commercial entity and that there is a hard product schedule that they can't make that timeline. Again, we just need to understand what our options are and don't close yourself off. Yeah, we want to try to hit the date. That's our goal, but don't box yourself in that the only way to close this off is a patch. We're ultimately looking at the downstream consumer. We're trying to help them manage their risk, and how best can we do that?
A good example, Jonathan, are the CPU patches, not to pick on Intel, but
Hey, there's more than just one CPU vendor.
That's true. It's true.
Okay, I think that so as this is this appropriate, or do we want to make any more changes to this bullet point?
I think we needed to strike literally the A portion.
Okay,
Just
great,
grammatically.
perfect, and do. Okay. There is a comment here on, we expect maintainers to respond within 21 days to let us know how the issue is being mitigated to protect impacted end users. If we have either, there's a Jason Kurtzstedt is asking that we add, if we have either direct confirmation or reasonable confidence that our report has been received and do not receive engagement from the project affirming intention to fix the vulnerability within 21 days after reporting, the OpenSSF reserves the right to publicly disclose a vulnerability at that point. So there's two comments on this section. One discussion is about the 21 days and people wanting to push it out to 30. And then the other comment is about only disclosing at 21 days if we have confirmation and reasonable confidence that the report has been received. So the first part is having confidence that a report has been received is really hard, because if basically this clause that Jason's proposing allows a vendor or maintainer to ghost you, and then you can never have the 21-day timeline of confirmation. Like if the maintainer doesn't respond within 21 days, right, that could be the vendor ghosting you, or it could be them not being there, right? In either case, it's not a good, it's not a good indicator. Chrome.
Please remember that the overwhelming majority of open source developers are not officially attached to a commercial entity, so there is no vendor behind them.
Right.
Yeah, and a lot of critical, especially in the PM ecosystem, I guess. I have no data at the moment, but there was a research that said that a lot of critical dependency, or at least dependencies that are very popular, are maintained by one person. And this means that if this person is on vacation, because this person can have 4 weeks off, we have a problem.
So by updating the amount of time, can we can this suggestion if we increase this time number?
Yeah, at least 4 weeks. In Europe, it is quite common, especially in North of Europe, that people go in vacation for 4, 5 weeks or in parental leave, and they don't touch the phone or internet connection.
Okay, so you're saying that we should make it something like 5 weeks. So 5 times 7.
Yeah, usually 5 weeks is enough at least to check something. And in particular, if we think that is super urgent or critical, we can find also other way to communicate with the maintainers. I mean, One thing is try to open an issue and maybe you miss the notification. One thing is if you try to send an email, tag you on Twitter and so on. So it's a different level of communication. So 5 weeks and more attempts.
Is there any other perspectives anybody wants to share on that? Oh, no, I'll go for it.
Is there being that open source projects are the target audience, as Krab pointed out, and this is the vulnerability disclosure group, how do you guys pinpoint who to contact if you want to discreetly contact someone about a vulnerability? Is there a standard way, or is that kind of what we're working on?
That exists in another document that we've created called there's a reporter guide or a disclosure guide that was created that goes through the steps of where to find this, like where to look to find to report a vulnerability.
Okay. Very good. I put
I'll
Open
find that and
University
drop a
as my
link in the chat.
affiliation, but what was that?
I'll find it and drop a link in the chat, but the answer is it depends.
Great.
Open source is beautiful, delicate snowflake, and rarely do two projects do things exactly the same
Yeah.
way. But the researcher guide that Jonathan mentioned kind of gives some good practice suggestions.
Good.
Okay.
I put Open University as my affiliation, but I work on a security research lab at UCSB, and we find a lot of stuff there.
So is it okay if I can? Oh, go ahead, Randall.
I was gonna say I think I'm +1 canning the Jason suggestion because I feel like that's there's problems with that. I feel like it gets tricky, and I don't think that it'll be perceived correctly.
Any other? I've seen nods. Great. Question from Mike Dolan, who is legal at LF. Will the OpenSSF be releasing a patch to fix the vulnerability? And my response is maybe. It depends upon if something can be done, but it's not a hard requirement. All right. Here's a point. David is bringing up the point that if we observe a previously unknown and unpatched vulnerability in software under active exploitation, we believe more urgent action is available. Within 7 days is appropriate. This is fairly standard across the industry. Crow?
I was requesting after this, can we table this discussion for a future call?
Yes.
We
Is there
are,
any way that we could add another one of these calls in a week instead of pushing it to 2 weeks?
It's open source, Jonathan. If you can dream it, it can happen.
All right, I will add another vulnerability disclosures working group meeting in a week.
Yeah, just shoot a note to the list saying, hey, we're going to talk about the policy again, at this day and time. Anyone interested, please join.
Perfect. So let's just finish this one and then yes, move on to the other topic. Is that good? Great. So David, are you here? No. Okay. Crow, there's a lot of conversation here about 7 days. Crow, you had an opinion you wanted to share on this?
I have a lot of opinions, but that doesn't mean anything. Where is this? That's 7 days. Yeah, I would strike that language. I provided a suggestion on how you could reword that, like if widespread exploitation of the vulnerability discovered, we will work with the maintainer and the reporter to accelerate public disclosure. I would, again, not lock yourself into 7 days, especially if you know bad guys are actively doing this. That is absolutely a time to break the glass and pull the alarm.
So you're saying that 7 days maybe not in you maybe need to be faster than 7 days, or
possibly. And using the suggestion I gave you gives you flexibility for whatever the circumstance. We can't predict every maybe a meteor is going to hit the earth. We don't know. I'm not going to waste a lot of time documenting a process for that right now. I'll figure that out when I see it.
Doesn't the within already carry that? So the within means that it can be less than or equal to 7 days?
I would not box myself into that. but that's just my experience and my opinion.
You have some very literal people in open source, Jonathan.
I know. Randall, you gotta go for it.
Oh, I was gonna say about Mike Dolan. I think that he just wanted to point out that there might be some legal trickery there with releasing a patch, so you might want to just talk to him about that. I was just gonna say that.
Okay, fair. I mean, this is a whole nother thing about automating vulnerability exposure. I think that setting it as an expectation here up front so there's no surprises is helpful. It gives a clear-cut date or number of days. And if we say up front, hey, this is known to be under active exploitation, I've never actually run into this case in the real world where I've had a vulnerability I've disclosed that's under active exploitation. But I don't like if it's under you have, yeah.
I've had also embargo leaks is the more likely scenario, and you need to move everything up,
Mm-hmm.
and that the timeline doesn't necessarily work for those emergency scenarios.
Again, I think this line covers that too. Right,
I would encourage you, Jonathan. I do think Krobe's wording here is very precise for like, because you got to account for a lot of things, man. You really do. And the other thing about it is that if you get real precise, you're going to start getting, but I can't do 7 days and that, yeah, like, yeah, you don't want to come off as aggressive is all I'm saying. And 7 days starts pushing that line.
Well, Chrome is saying that it may need to be faster than 7 days, not
Again, with all love, people within open source tend to be very pedantic and literal. So if we provide ourselves the flexibility, saying, you know, if there's an emergency, we reserve the right to change. So I would again suggest I gave you some words that you can talk through, and then I would tack on your, you know, we reserve the right to move forwards and backwards. I would kind of combine those two thoughts and not write down a number that people are going to obsess over.
Especially in the first period, we need to be sure that people follow us. And it's quite hard, especially in the non-commercial open source. And I totally understand them. And security is not their first concern for a lot of reasons, or at least a kind of security. And so, and company were quite aggressive or are quite aggressive sometimes with open source maintainer. So probably give the possibility to be elastic, or just in the document write something, a sort of escape can probably help us to achieve better result. So from that perspective, probably the 99% of people will fix the issue, especially if the fix is easy in 90 days. So we are trying just to prevent community discussion on Twitter or other social network about potential implication that probably never happened, but this is the point. We want to be sure to have a good communication so we can start to work, and after that we start to work, probably we have no problem in real life. But people like to talk and I can understand them before that the project can start. So
I'm concerned that if you don't set a solid expectation up front in the fine, because most disclosures, when you send these to people, you're going to be like, this disclosure follows this policy link, right? You're not going to include this entire body in the disclosure, in the email vulnerability disclosure, right? So this puts this information up front in there as something that they can look at, but they don't have to. But at least they can go back to that. If you say, hey, this is under active exploitation, this is the policy that we have for that, you can point to this policy and there's no surprises, right? Like it's not, we're making this up on the fly. This is the policy that we have set standard, and we apply this to all vendors uniformly, or open source maintainers uniformly. Randall?
Yeah, but sorry.
No, Luigi, go ahead. I'll go after you.
No, the point is that I mean, I think that a lot of people don't read really the policy, so probably they just try to find the deadline in the policy, the number. That is, so if we add the point or just a sentence to say, hey, if there are particular scenario, we can have this particular procedure, even if there is no specific deadline for that procedure. But people read that usually we disclose in 90 days and there are 4 weeks to be informed or to have the first contact. Probably they follow this kind of, okay, it can happen that you can find someone that try to exploit the policy. It's happened sometimes in the open source, but it is 1 or 2 cases, not the majority of the scenario that I think. So I think it is an acceptable risk. And if we have a similar scenario, we can just try to discuss and see how we can handle it. Probably every similar scenario that are very rare scenario or uncommon scenario need a different approach to be solved.
I was gonna plus one what Liju was saying, and the other thing I was gonna say, Jonathan, was if you're trying to go for like widespread adoption, I think that you should try to be as like less rigid as possible, so like as flexible and kind of understanding. And I think as time goes on, you can implement a lot of these rules, because in an ideal world, you are correct, these things would be great. But I think that starting kind of like laid back, getting people to understand that what we're trying to do is not like put pressure on you or force you to think about security or anything along those lines. Like, we're trying to help you. And I think if we stick to language that is flexible and open like that, you're going to have a lot more people willing to work with you than trying to point out that one project that can't do 7 days because they're super important, but they have no maintainers. And it's like, yeah, but that's an edge case. So yeah.
Right, but you're not,
Because in all honesty,
so
that's what's gonna derail your conversations, is those people pointing out where this isn't going to work for that one person.
right, which is what we're doing right here, right? And first off, active exploitation is very rare, right? So it's very uncommon that we're going to run into this. And second off, it's not very again, we're working with open source projects. If it's a 1-person project, right? Like, when you see active exploitation, it's mostly when you're dealing with big projects like struts, right? Apache struts, or database ORMs are big projects, right? So I mean, I recognize that we're all building on a pile of sticks, but in general, what you're seeing is it impacting these bigger projects, and we're not dealing with this. We're not putting this deadline on those smaller maintainers necessarily. Crow, I think that I'm going to leave this conversation open. I'm going to think more about this. We can chat about it at the next call. I'm going to hand that back over to you, Crow, to pass. Yeah, I will send out an email to everybody, and also post in the Slack channel about trying to schedule a meeting for next week to continue this topic.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your attention and your perspectives. It's valuable to have these different perspectives as we're trying to shape this, because theoretically it's going to have a very broad impact for the foundation. We'll make sure that it's as helpful as possible and not hurtful. All right, so look forward to Jonathan's Slack and email request for call. Anyone that is interested in collaborating on this more, please join. Let's move on to OpenVex. And I don't know that we're going to have time to talk about Luigi's policy. So maybe next time, sir.
Yeah, but also on Slack, for me, it's okay. If we move the discussion on Slack, it's definitely okay.
Great. So please, everybody, scroll back and look at Luigi's request in Slack. We can address it that way. So now on to OpenVex. After an exciting 2 weeks of very passionate conversation, ultimately the working group, 11 eligible members voted in favor to adopt OpenVex, and we had 5 dissenting opinions, and essentially many people abstained. So per the our charter, that is a majority. So the group has voted to adopt OpenVex spec and software as a member project within our group. Our next steps are going to be requesting the TAC to formally vote on this and go through a legal review of the IP and seeing about getting that transferred over to the foundation. So I'd like to use our last couple minutes if we have any additional feedback or comments around OpenVex.
I just want to say thanks, Krob, for organizing all of this, getting us here. I have a proposal to file for the TAC, which I'll send up shortly for that next step.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. And this is just another aspect where this group can help collaborate on something that is important for the industry. Sharing vulnerability information is one of our key goals for this working group. Just like we talked about Jonathan's policy, this is another means of us communicating and sharing vulnerability information. OpenVex is another tool that we have the opportunity to help collaborate, help shape standards, and help influence things like SBOM and CSAF and other important industry standards. And we can provide that open source perspective. Any additional comments or feedback? I want to thank everybody that participated in the issue for your time and attention and attendance and patience. It definitely did not unfold exactly as I had envisioned, but we had a lot of good feedback from both sides, both pro and against the argument, something for us to consider as we move forward. All right, well, we do, if there are no other comments, we have 8 minutes that Luigi can sneak in and kickstart his conversation if desired.
Just real
Yeah,
quick, hop in real quick. I'm going to make this working group call on next Wednesday, the same time slot we're currently in right now, which is as currently not taken up by any other OSSF calls.
Invite me, please.
Yes, Krob, that work for you?
Today it does,
Okay.
but tomorrow I may have a large customer of mine suck up my whole Wednesday
Okay.
with a QBR, so we'll see.
Okay, I can run that call if I need to solo. All right, cool.
They threatened to, they haven't committed to it yet.
Okay. All right, Luigi, go for it.
I am working on security insights to understand if it can be a good format to share some information about security about the project. And I've seen that and a security policy and a security contact is a requirement. And some of our repo didn't have a security policy or security.md or a way to communicate with the maintainers. And so I would like to propose to have an organizational level security policy, a generic one that give to the maintainer enough flexibility. Every project or repo on GitHub can have their own one, but by design, maybe, especially when we create a repo, we can have a sort of design policy. We can use the feature by GitHub for private security issue. So every repo can receive their own issue without handing an email, but we need to have an email, a generic one. I have already talked in the document, you can see comment to have just a security@openssf.org. The policy want to be easy to read for researcher and quick to read. And so they can find just the contact or how to report the vulnerability and how we communicate with them. So it is short. I mean, the reason why it is so short or not full of details, it is a choice. Because I don't think that we need to add the complexity if there is no reason. And I have based the policy on your working group repo. So I started from the security.md that you suggest. Then I have added more context, especially because I propose, a bit more on context. especially the main change, I mean, is that we don't use the email as first contact, but this private security issue that we need to enable to organization level on GitHub, but it should not be a problem. It's not perfect. Probably in the future we can adapt or improve it according how people report security issue, and I'm quite sure that some report projects that are more popular can receive more report than other. And I expect also a lot of false positive initially. It's quite common. But I think that we need to have a security policy. So I am proposing this one, and feel free to add comment or suggestion, edit. I can just approve them. I am very happy if you suggest edit, especially about English, maybe, that I am not a mother language. So, and that is in short. Then and a formal approval when we are ready. Now the document is a draft.
So team, what do we think about the idea of having a consistent security MD across all foundation projects? Considering the fact that we recommended it as a best practice in our guide.
100%, yes.
Also, I found a vulnerability in the infrastructure of the OpenSSF GitHub Slack or GitHub infrastructure, and that prompted us to actually add a security@openssf.org email address. So there is now one that is forwarded to operations currently, but there is an email address that exists currently. So that email that's listed in that document is valid.
So personally, I think this is important for us to do for consistency, and also to kind of show that we not only have great ideas, but we follow through on those great ideas. So I would love personally to help collaborate on this. Any other thoughts or comments? I saw a whole swath of thumbs up and check marks. So it seems like this is an uncontroversial suggestion, which is new for us.
Don't post it in the issue tracker.
All right, so I think our next step would be actually to create an issue so that we kind of formally log this as kind of a project for us. And let's keep this on the docket. I would encourage us as we get that issue and things put together, please review the document and provide comments now. Don't wait, but let's make this an official work item for us to move forward on.
Luigi, can you also make sure you send it? So I know you sent it to the Slack channel, but the best way that I've actually seen people responding and actually clicking on things to review is if you send it to the email chain. That's where people actually seem to, well, they come in from a lot of places, but the email chain seems to work nicely to get people that are not on this call.
Okay, I will try.
Yeah, and if you need assistance, don't hesitate to reach out to us in Slack. I could get help, write an email. But no, I think this is worthwhile work for us, and definitely kind of is in line with our goals and mission. And I think it's something that it will require some review, but is pretty simple for us to do and commonsensical.
Okay.
So +1.
Thank you.
Yeah. Last 2 minutes. Any questions, comments, feedback?
Yes. If you're not able to make it to the meeting next week, what are the following? So after this document is in a state that we're happy with, what is the process by which a document like this gets submitted to the TAC for review?
You would create an issue and then mail the TAC mailing list. Dear TAC, please look at this issue.
Okay.
Provide feedback, blah, blah. They just had their call last week. So the next call probably won't be a good idea, because that will be the results of the TAC election. FYI, there's a TAC election. Hopefully those of you that signed up to participate got an email. So please participate in the vote. But I imagine that TAC meeting will be consumed with getting potentially new TAC members up to speed. But don't wait. Let's get that issue created and get that mail sent out so that to kind of get it in the queue. And I'll help.
You're saying that I should get this into the queue before our meeting of next week, just so they can start reviewing it, because they're going to have feedback and we can incorporate that.
No, let's don't give them a half finished product. Let's give
Okay.
them something that's done. But after that, like immediately after, file the issue and
Yeah.
then send the email to the TAC mailing list.
Okay, all right.
But I don't, looking at the docket of work, I don't know that they'll get to it that call, but we'll do our
Yeah.
best.
Yeah. Crow, there's one comment in here that was just you responding, and I don't have a response from you, so I'm gonna send it to you. And if you could respond to the question that I posed to you explicitly, that would be great with all your free time.
Yeah, I got nothing but free time.
Yeah, all right. Thank you all. I really appreciate the time that you guys are put into this with me. It's been a lot of work on this document, so thank you so much.
Cheers, everybody. Thank you. Excellent call. I appreciate the participation. Great session. Talk to y'all later.
Bye.
Jonathan, could you add me to your invite?